Hello and welcome to World News Tonight here on TVP World with me, Ashim Kumar. Tonight we talk about protests in Serbia and Turkey, but first, the headlines. Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk urges Europe to treat security at the Belarusian frontier as a shared responsibility. With Poland's presidential election nearing, a surge in support for the far right. On World Water Day, 40% of Poles worry about drought in a country where 60% of the land is agricultural. Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk visited Poland's eastern border today, calling on Europe to treat the Polish-Belarusian frontier as a shared responsibility. Poland is battling what it describes a hybrid operation by Belarus, which is using migrants from the Middle East and Africa to destabilize the region.
Poland's border guard is seeing a sharp rise in the number of migrants trying to force their way into Poland.
In 2025, we recorded more than 2,200 attempts to illegally cross the Polish-Belarusian border.
Top Polish officials, including the Prime Minister, Defense and Interior Ministers, visited soldiers and border guards stationed near Belarus on Saturday.
Today, I received a report confirming at least the organizational and political patronage of President Lukashenko's administration. We know of Russian involvement in the operation.
Warsaw says it has reached a 98% effectiveness in stopping illegal migrants from crossing.
There are around 5,000 soldiers at the border, 1,000 soldiers in reserve ready at all times, and 17,000 soldiers deployed for this operation. This is one of the largest operations in Polish history.
To eliminate all crossings, the Polish parliament had passed a bill allowing a temporary suspension of asylum rights. It was approved with the support of the ruling coalition and much of the opposition. The bill awaits signing by President Duda. Under the new law, those who cross from Belarus could be denied the right to apply for international protection. Although there seems to be a consensus when it comes to the need to protect the border, the ruling coalition and the right-wing opposition have clashed over how to approach the issue, while Tusk wants more EU support.
We are mobilizing Europe to treat this border as a shared responsibility.
Last week, MEPs of the Conservative Law and Justice Party voted against a resolution that included labeling the East Shield as a key EU border protection project.
If they give away control over defense to Brussels, or rather Berlin, then EU oligarchs will say it's not possible to build military bases east of the Vistula River. Why? Because they'll say it will provoke Russia.
The East Shield foresees the construction of physical barriers along Poland's eastern border, aimed at slowing down a possible invasion from the east. The EU will help Poland finance the investment. For TVP World, Marek Steele.
We will soon have a full ceasefire, says Donald Trump, referring to the war in Ukraine. He added that agreements would be made later, but did not provide further details. The next round of negotiations is set to take place over the next few days. We now go to Kyiv and our correspondent there, Oz Kataji. Oz, good evening to you. What's the latest on what's happening in these talks and the attitude in Ukraine?
Well, Donald Trump's enthusiasm aside, very little has changed here in Kyiv. The government's position on what they expect going forward is very clear. The things that they have ruled out as red lines, conceding more territory, for example, that's very clear. That hasn't changed at all. But the must be said, the Russians, for their part, also haven't changed their position with their maximalist demands. So the enthusiasm from the White House does seem a little bit inexplicable if you were someone who was trying to match those statements with the reality of what's actually happening and what both sides are saying. Now, Donald Trump did speak about this when he was asked a question by reporters. Let's take a listen to what he had to say about that.
Not a deadline, but I think we'll have one. I think, they're going at it pretty heavy right now, as you probably saw, both of them. But I think we'll have it done fairly soon. We are moving along on Russia-Ukraine. We had a couple of good conversations today, and maybe we can get that death march stopped as soon as possible.
Well, we know that President Zelensky visited the front today and that attacks on civilians in Ukraine continue. What can you tell us about those two things, Oz?
Well, 7 people have been killed and 38 others injured in Russian attacks across Ukraine over the last 24 hours, with a family of 3 being killed in Zaporizhia in southeastern Ukraine, the most heavily hit area. Local authorities report that there were 10 strikes in the city, leaving 14 people wounded at the largest one, authorities having to sift through rubble to pull people out of it. Zelensky, for his part, also visited front lines on Saturday, visiting the Donetsk region and the Kharkiv region. He awarded some soldiers, gave them state awards and thanked them for their service. But there can be no mistaking what's happening here is incredibly difficult for the people of Ukraine, for the soldiers fighting it out, and also for the civilians who are bearing the brunt of these attacks. 7 civilians killed again in attacks today. So, like I said earlier, the enthusiasm from the White House notwithstanding, Russian attacks are still killing Ukrainians every day here in Ukraine, Ashim.
Indeed, the horror continues. Oz, thank you very much for that update and stay safe. Protesters have gathered at the court where Istanbul Mayor Ekrem İmamoğlu, the main opposition leader, and other detainees are appearing on terrorism charges in what critics call a political move ahead of upcoming elections. Sasha Farbach has more.
It was the 3rd day and night of protest and defiance, as tensions soared across Turkey from Izmir to Ankara to Istanbul. Protesters clashed violently with police. More than 340 arrests were made on Friday alone as authorities unleashed water cannons, pepper spray and rubber bullets. All marking one of the largest displays of civil defiance the country has seen in years. People are angry at the detaining of popular mayor Ekrem İmamoğlu, who has emerged as the de facto leader of Turkey's opposition.
Recently, he's come out and said that he was going to run against President Erdogan in the upcoming elections. The elections are still a couple of years away, but he has put his name out there. He has put his name down, and the current currency in Turkey is on the street is that he is going to be one of the future leaders of Turkey.
Ekrem İmamoğlu was set to become the CHP opposition's presidential candidate. This move by the authorities to detain him on charges of terrorism has deeply divided the nation, with experts noting that 2 starkly contrasting narratives are now unfolding.
One of them are coming from the government, from the ruling party. They are saying it's something coming from corruption, the accusations of Ekrem İmamoğlu. So it's something related with with the court. It's not something related with the authority from Erdogan or from his party. The other narrative we know that coming from the opposition, they are saying this is a politically action against Ekrem İmamoğlu, something undemocratic.
The detention of İmamoğlu, Istanbul's 2-term mayor, marks the culmination of a months-long legal crackdown on opposition figures, with critics claiming it's a calculated effort to weaken their chances in the upcoming elections. Yet İmamoğlu is defiant, calling on his supporters to gather and nominate him on Sunday.
Tomorrow, Sunday, March 23rd, all Republican People's Party members will vote for me as their presidential candidate. I invite all my fellow party members to the ballot box in full.
The past days have seen protests in several cities, with many peaceful demonstrations turning into tense clashes with police. Turkey's president is unmoved and has harsh words for the opposition and those on the streets.
You cannot get anywhere anymore in this country by following marginals to attack police, threatening our judges and prosecutors who are doing their duty, by pressing courts, by challenging democracy and the national will, and using illegal, unethical and anti-democratic methods. Turkey was not a country that was found on the streets and will not submit to street terrorism.
The streets, however, are increasingly seeing a surge of demonstrators, angry at how Erdogan's government is dealing with the opposition. Despite the thousands showing their dismay, some experts believe things could still escalate.
And the regime is more autocratic than illiberal. So I think we may be seeing scenes where there's a greater crackdown over the next week or so.
At the moment, Istanbul seems as a barometer for a nation teetering on the edge. With recent arrests and clashes continuing, the situation shows no signs of easing, and the days ahead may bring even more unrest. The city, and indeed the country, remains on high alert. Sasha Farbach, TVP World.
Serbia is also on edge as anti-government protests intensify against President Aleksandar Vučić. The unrest was sparked by the tragic collapse of the Novi Sad railway station canopy, which killed 16 people and was blamed on government corruption. Now, inflammatory comments from Deputy Prime Minister Alexander Vulin praising Russian intelligence have further fueled tensions.
Alexander Vulin, the Deputy Prime Minister of Serbia, has made no secret of who his friends are. Now he has taken to public praises too.
I am very grateful to the Russian special services, which always support us in our fight against color revolutions, primarily with information.
These inflammatory comments come amidst the ongoing anti-government protests against President Aleksandar Vučić. The protests first erupted after the Novi Sad tragedy.
Canopy of one of the largest railway stations that is placed in Novi Sad has collapsed, killing at that time 15 people. The renovation of this station was financed by the government with huge amount of money, millions of euros, and it has been seen as a corrupt event.
On Friday, it was confirmed that the death toll climbed to 16, with a 19-year-old man pronounced deceased. A week before the tragic news, Serbia witnessed the biggest demonstration in its modern history.
Hundreds of thousands of people have gathered here from around the country, many people taking a long journey to the capital here to show their disagreement with the government.
I can say for sure that our fight will definitely continue until we see results.
This is despite the attempts to appease the protesters, including the stepping down of Prime Minister Miloš Vučević, who formally accepted his resignation this past Wednesday.
The current structure of the Serbian political system actually creates a situation in which the resignation of the current prime minister is just a fig leaf. Any other prime minister in the current political setting will be another Vučić's aide.
For his part, President Vučić attempted to discredit the protesters by claiming they were seeking a color revolution, parroting the language used by his Kremlin friends to discredit civic society in Russia and abroad.
We, in practical terms, identify two contradictory patterns. On one hand, mechanisms of silent repression that are being applied, and on the other hand, very shallow and inconsistent claims for various concessions to the protesters.
Serbs on the ground are pointing out that Vučić might be running out of options when it comes to keeping the protest movement at bay.
Suppression cannot go too much more, except for us becoming a complete police state with an iron fist. That would be really, really bad for our international community and the region.
Demonstrators now demand a new general election, which could go ahead as early as June. For TVP World, Zuzanna Jurek.
With Poland's presidential election approaching in May, the race is tightening. Frontrunners Rafał Trzaskowski and Karol Nawrocki are still expected to advance to the second round, but a surge in support for far-right Confederation leader Sławomir Mentzen could upend the contest.
This is Sławomir Mentzen, leader of Poland's far-right Confederation Party, who currently ranks third in preliminary presidential exit polls. Mentzen has built his career on controversial rhetoric. In the past, his party's five-point program opposed Jews, abortion, homosexuality, taxes and the European Union. In recent years, he has toned down his message, distancing himself from open anti-Semites and radicals within his party. However, his populist agenda has now shifted toward anti-Ukrainian sentiments, echoing Russian narratives that claim Ukrainian refugees are a burden on Poland.
The government is spending our money completely senselessly. Do you know that to this day we are still sending the 800-plus child benefit to Ukraine, to Ukrainian children studying in Ukrainian schools? Why are we doing this? What Polish taxpayer has an interest in sending social benefits to Ukraine? Is this why we go to work and pay taxes, so that our money is sent abroad? Medical tourism at our expense, and our politicians allowed it. This must stop.
The TVP World team spent an entire day with Sławomir Mentzen as he campaigned across the Podlasie region, making stops in Siemiatycze, Hanówka and Białystok, experiencing firsthand what has been described as one of the most extravagant and provocative presidential campaigns in Poland, which has taken the internet by storm. Despite his controversial views, Mentzen's popularity is growing, particularly on social media. On TikTok, he is now the most followed Polish presidential candidate, boasting 1.6 million followers, far ahead of his main rivals. Rafał Trzaskowski from the ruling Civic Coalition has only 47,000, while Karol Nawrocki, the candidate from the conservative Law and Justice Party, has just 20,000. His strong social media presence has captured the attention of young voters, many of whom will be casting their ballots for the first time this year.
I listened to him live, not just on TikTok and Instagram. I think he'll be a great president. As soon as I saw Mentzen on social media, I immediately knew he was my candidate because he truly wants the best for Poland, unlike other candidates. As a young Pole, I would be very happy if he won. I'm asking my parents to vote only for him.
Despite his rising influence, Mentzen is reluctant to engage with the media. After each campaign event, he avoids questions from the press and leaves quickly, often on his electric scooter. However, TVP World managed to speak with his press secretary, who attempted to deny Mentzen's anti-Ukrainian stance.
I think that Mentzen is not anti-Ukrainian. He supports Poland. When the war began in 2022, Mentzen, of course, said that Vladimir Putin has invaded Ukraine. He's responsible for the war. He's responsible also for the war crimes in Ukraine. Mentzen is anti-Russian, which, of course, many our political opponents say that we are pro-Russian, which is actually not true.
Mentzen, yeah, they're very much sort of. I would say they're pro-Russian, basically. I don't think we ever had such a big party which is pro-Russian, and the Confederacja is traditionally pro-Russian. He's trying to hide it, but he is.
With Poland's presidential election approaching in May, front-runners Rafał Trzaskowski and Karol Nawrocki are still expected to advance to the second round. However, Mentzen's support is growing rapidly. If his momentum continues, he could overtake Nawrocki, shaking up the race. For TVP World, I'm Anastasia Yanchenko.
Today is World Water Day, and in Poland, water is far from taken for granted. Despite its many lakes, rivers and coastline, the country faces growing challenges from climate change. Droughts, once rare, are becoming more frequent. A new survey shows 40% of Poles worry about droughts, an issue especially critical for a country where 60% of the land is agricultural.
It is World Water Day, and you better believe that here in Poland water is not taken for granted. We are at a special picnic in the Polish capital Warsaw, organized just for this occasion. So let's ask some Poles what they think about the world's most precious resource.
It's one of the most important resources we have, especially when there's no rain at summer, no rain and at winter.
The water is the kind of just life.
It's really important, really important.
With its many lakes, rivers and the sea, you'd think Poles would have plenty of water to go around. But climate change and global warming affect the entire planet, Poland included.
Nowadays, we have droughts in some regions of the country every year. In the past, Poland would experience a drought every several years. The worsening climate also brings much less snow in the winter.
According to the latest survey conducted especially for World Water Day, as many as 40% of Poles are concerned about the possibility of droughts. Statista.com tells us that 60% of land in Poland is agricultural, so it's no wonder that water is so vital for the Polish people. But droughts and unusually high temperatures can also cause an opposite effect. Too much water is something Poles are all too familiar with. Late last year, the south of Poland was struck by the biggest flood in decades, killing 9 people and causing more than 3 billion euros in damage.
We're getting less and less moderate rainfall. This means that it rains less frequently but much more intensively. That's not good because the water in rivers, canals and sewages overflows in a short period of time.
Water resources in Poland are very scarce compared to other countries, earning it the reputation of the dry man of Europe. Some 97% of its resources come from rainfall, with much of it lost due to leaks and waste.
We know that water can be deadly, but let's not forget about its most common use. We need to drink between 2 to 3 liters of water per day. So on this World Water Day, remember, keep yourself hydrated and please turn off that water tap when you don't use it. Kazimierz Łysiak from Warsaw, TVP World.
Talks on a US-brokered partial ceasefire in Ukraine are set to resume on Monday in Saudi Arabia. Talks are expected to focus on Black Sea security and energy infrastructure. Meanwhile, discussions of an international peacekeeping force and European defence plans continue. What are the prospects for peace? Well, joining us is Mark Montgomery. He's Senior Director at the Foundation for the Defence of Democracy. Mr. Montgomery, welcome to TVP World and thank you for taking the time.
Well, thank you very much for having me.
Pleasure, sir. So what are we expecting the talks to cover on Monday?
Well, I think first they're going to have to clarify exactly what is electrical infrastructure because and the infrastructure that they've agreed to not strike, because as you may know, the minute Vladimir Putin hung up the phone with Donald Trump after their last call, Russian strikes hit a significant amount of critical infrastructure in Ukraine. So I think the first thing is to define what electrical infrastructure is, what critical infrastructure is, and determine what the ceasefire is about, because you need to have a common set of facts. Once they have that set, they can go into the next stage of discussions.
So we're not even sure yet what is covered in the peace talks regarding infrastructure. Now, there is a perception, isn't there, Mr. Montgomery, that President Trump is caving in to a lot of Putin's demands without asking for more in return. I'm thinking about Crimea, the Black Sea, Ukraine not joining NATO. The list is quite long. What do you say to those comments?
Well, I think it's very accurate to say that President Trump conducted a maximum pressure campaign against Ukraine, got them probably way too early to concede what they would agree to get to a ceasefire in terms of where the line of demarcation and such, and the critical minerals deal with the United States. President Trump has failed to run that same kind of maximum pressure campaign against Vladimir Putin. And until he does that, I don't think you'll ever get real concessions from Russia or from Putin until he feels pressure, whether it's sanctions, increased weapons deliveries, increased intelligence sharing between the U.S. and Ukraine. Without those kind of things, particularly anchored in the sanctions, I don't think you're going to get real change in President Putin's bargaining position.
Do you see this, Mr. Montgomery, as a strategy by President Putin to just keep the talks going while they keep bombing Ukraine?
For sure, he's delaying until he has all of Kursk region captured. And I do think he would like to see how much more pressure he can bring on Ukraine. Ukraine has perturbations in its force structure right now because there was a temporary cutoff of munitions. There's a perception that the United States is not starting new munitions purchases for Ukraine. So there's some likelihood that he'll continue to press and pressure until he feels pressure himself. He's an autocrat. Who illegally invaded Ukraine. I don't know why he would stop at this point unless he feels pressure.
Okay, now you mentioned supplies, military supplies for Ukraine. Is the European Union or Europe in general prepared to step into the breach here?
So first, the good news is the breach is going to still have a lot of American equipment coming into it, both Presidential Drawdown Authority and Ukrainian security initiative and assistance initiatives, which were purchases for Ukraine from our defense industrial base, will be flowing in over the next 3, 6, 9, 12 months. The difference is if the United States doesn't put new orders in, that won't be fulsome in the later months, 6, 9, 12 months from now, and it will then peter off completely. That's where the Europeans have to step in. So hopefully there'll be some increase by the United States, some return to some level by the United States. But then your point is right. The Europeans have to step in there. Now, the sad truth is their defense industrial base means they're going to have to step in by probably buying some things from America and some things from European companies until they rebuild the European defense industrial base, which basically died off starting in the early 1990s.
Right. Now, Zaporizhzhia nuclear power station is one of the negotiating issues between Ukraine and Russia. Now, President Trump has said, America will take over the running of that power station, which President Zelensky has been completely against. How do you think this is going to play out? Because clearly it's a vital source of energy for Ukraine. What do you think is going to happen?
And I'd add one third wild card in, which is Putin, through his acolytes, has made it clear he has no intention of giving it up. So you have three parties in here. I'd say the United States is the weakest case. I happen to operate U.S. nuclear reactors during my naval career, and these are slightly different or somewhat different reactors. So this is not our natural home turf. They need to be operated by Ukrainians. They need to be returned. Zaporizhzhia needs to be returned to Ukraine. And it's going to take a lot of money and safety checks to get it back up and operational. It's had drone strikes, some artillery strikes. While they're in a shutdown condition now, to get it started back up will take some time. But Putin's not going to give up on this easy. This is going to need part of that maximum pressure campaign to get Putin's grisly hands off of it.
Right. Well, thank you very much, Mr. Montgomery, for your analysis. We'll be watching carefully and hope you'll come back and share some more with our audience. Have a good day, sir.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you. Well, as we mentioned earlier, today is Earth Water Day, and Earth Water Hour starts in just a minute or so in Poland at 8:30 p.m. Central European Time. And this is how it's being acknowledged in the centre of Warsaw. So that's what the Palace of Culture looks like in the centre of town. And in about 20 seconds, actually, all the lights will go off, which is the traditional way of acknowledging Earth Hour as lights go off around the world at about the same time. So you've got about 5 seconds and counting. So wait for it, and here we go.